It was just another crisp autumn evening in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of night where the world seemed to exhale, the air tinged with the smell of falling leaves and faint hints of firewood smoke. Inside a modest but cozy home, Ava Thomas, a 14-year-old with a natural curiosity and a fire in her spirit, was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. Her father, Marcus, a hard-working single parent and former high school coach, was at the stove preparing dinner. Life for the Thomas family was far from extravagant, but Marcus had always made sure his daughter felt safe and supported. "Hey, Dad, look at this," Ava said suddenly, her voice tinged with frustration. She held up her phone, her screen glowing in the dimly lit room. "The police did it again. Another unarmed teenager, and they're trying to call it a mistake." Her eyes burned with a mix of anger and sadness. Marcus stopped stirring the pot and turned toward her. His face, weathered from years of hard work and life's struggles, softened as he walked over to take a closer look. On her phone was a video that had already gone viral, showing a chaotic scene in the heart of a nearby city. People were shouting, the blue and red lights of police cars flashing in the background. The caption read, "Another life lost. Another family broken. When will it end?" Ava's voice trembled as she continued. "He was just walking home. He didn't even do anything, Dad. How can they keep doing this and just get away with it?" Marcus let out a deep sigh, his heart heavy with the familiar ache of a world that seemed to weigh disproportionately on people like them. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said, his voice low but firm. "But what I do know is that we can't stay silent. Silence lets things like this keep happening." Ava looked up at her father, her brown eyes searching his face. "What can we even do? It feels like nobody listens. Nobody cares unless it happens to them." Her words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. She was right, of course, but he couldn't let her believe that change was impossible. He had always taught her to stand up for what was right, to be strong even when it felt like the world was stacked against them. This moment, he realized, was a chance to show her what that really meant. Without another word, Marcus walked to the counter and grabbed his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment as he scrolled through his contacts, his jaw tightening with determination. Ava watched him curiously. "Dad, what are you doing?" she asked. "I'm calling someone who can help us get the truth," he said, his voice steady but with an edge of resolve. "We're not just going to sit here and hope someone else fixes this. We're going to find out what really happened, and we're going to make sure people hear about it." As the phone rang, Ava felt a mixture of anxiety and hope bubbling in her chest. She had never seen her dad like this, so focused, so sure of himself. Whoever he was calling, it was clear he had a plan. The line clicked, and a voice answered on the other end. "Marcus, it's been a while. What's going on?" "I need your help, man," Marcus said. "Something happened downtown, and I'm not letting it get swept under the rug. I need to know everything, what the police aren't saying, what the witnesses saw. Everything." The person on the other end paused before replying. "You sure about this, Marcus? Once you start digging, there's no going back." Marcus glanced at Ava, her face a mix of fear and determination. "I'm sure," he said firmly. And just like that, the wheels were set in motion. Neither of them knew what lay ahead, but one thing was certain, this was only the beginning. Ava's curiosity mixed with apprehension as she leaned closer, trying to overhear the conversation. Marcus paced the room, his tone unwavering as he spoke into the phone. Ava had never seen her father so intensely focused. Normally, he was the calm in the storm, the one who found solutions without raising his voice. But tonight, there was a fire in him, one she rarely saw. When he hung up, Ava immediately asked, "Who was that? What are we going to do?" Marcus placed the phone on the counter and looked directly at his daughter. "That was Darnell. He's an old friend, works as an investigative journalist now. If anyone can find out what really happened, it's him. But it's not going to be easy. Stories like this, real stories, don't just come out without a fight. People in power, they like to keep things quiet." Ava's mind raced. She had heard about her dad's friend Darnell before, though only in passing. From what she knew, he was the kind of guy who wouldn't back down from a challenge, especially one that involved uncovering the truth. "Do you think the police are hiding something?" Ava asked cautiously. Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know for sure. But I do know that when things don't add up, there's usually more to the story than what they're telling us. And if that's the case, we're going to make sure the truth sees the light of day." That night, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Ava felt it like a current in the air, an energy that crackled with both fear and determination. She stayed up late, her mind spinning with possibilities. What if they discovered something big? What if they were putting themselves in danger? The next morning, Marcus was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. A steaming cup of coffee sat untouched beside him as he scrolled through news articles, police reports, and social media posts. Ava joined him, rubbing her eyes. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" she asked, her voice still groggy. Marcus shook his head. "There's too much to do. Darnell's already started looking into things, but we need more. The witnesses in that video, some of them are talking on social media, but others are staying quiet. We need to find out why." Ava sat down across from him, a newfound determination in her eyes. "How can I help?" Her father smiled faintly, proud of her courage. "For now, just keep an eye on what people are saying online. Sometimes the smallest detail can lead to something big." The two of them spent the day piecing together the fragments of a story that felt like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. They discovered that the teenager in the video, Jamal Carter, was only 16 years old. He was walking home from a friend's house when he encountered the police. Witnesses said he had his hands up, yet the situation somehow escalated. The official statement from the department was vague, full of the usual phrases: "an unfortunate incident, a misunderstanding, under investigation." By the afternoon, Darnell called with an update. "Marcus, I've been digging into the officers involved," he said. "One of them has a history, complaints about excessive force, but nothing ever stuck. The department always swept it under the rug. I'm working on getting more details, but this isn't just about one bad decision. There's a pattern here." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Patterns like this didn't just happen, they were allowed to happen. And if they didn't act fast, Jamal's story would be buried under bureaucracy and forgotten, like so many others. As the days went on, the Thomas household became a hub of activity. Darnell provided updates daily, and Marcus made calls to community leaders and activists. Ava, meanwhile, turned her social media accounts into a platform for spreading awareness about Jamal's case. She used hashtags, shared stories, and even started creating videos urging people to demand answers. But with attention came scrutiny. One evening, as Marcus returned home from a meeting with local organizers, he noticed a car parked down the street. Its headlights dimmed, but the silhouette of someone inside was just visible enough to make his stomach twist. "Everything okay, Dad?" Ava asked, noticing the tension in his face as he locked the front door behind him. "Yeah," Marcus said, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine." But in his gut, he knew that wasn't entirely true. The next morning, a knock at the door startled them both. Marcus opened it to find two uniformed officers standing on the porch. They weren't smiling. "Mr. Thomas," one of them said, his tone neutral but firm. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about some posts your daughter has been making online." Ava froze, her heart pounding. Marcus stood his ground, his voice calm but unyielding. "Is there a problem, officer?" The second cop, taller and visibly annoyed, stepped forward. "We just want to make sure there aren't any misunderstandings." These kinds of accusations can cause unnecessary tension in the community. Marcus crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. Unnecessary tension? Or accountability? The officers exchanged a glance, their postures stiffening. "Just be careful, Mr. Thomas," the first one said. "Sometimes it's best to let things take their course." When they left, Ava turned to her dad, her voice shaking. "What does that mean? Are they threatening us?" Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It means we're getting close. And that scares them." What neither of them realized was how deep this would go, or how much they'd uncover before it was over. The knock on the door stayed with Marcus long after the officers had left. It wasn't the first time he'd felt the weight of authority pressing against him, but something about this felt different. It wasn't just about him anymore. Ava was involved now, and the thought of her being a target made his stomach twist. He couldn't show his fear, though, not to her. She needed to see strength, to believe they were on the right side of this fight. Ava, meanwhile, couldn't shake the image of the officers standing on their porch. Their words echoed in her mind, "Sometimes it's best to let things take their course." What did that even mean? Were they trying to scare her? Did they want her to stop talking about Jamal? She didn't want to admit it to her dad, but it had worked. She was scared. Still, that fear was nothing compared to the anger bubbling inside her. Later that evening, as they sat together in the living room, Ava broke the silence. "Dad, do you think they're watching us?" Marcus looked up from his laptop, his face calm but his eyes sharp. "Probably. But that doesn't mean we stop. It means we're doing something right." Ava wasn't sure how he could sound so certain, but she nodded anyway. What if they try to stop us? Like, for real? They won't, Marcus said firmly. And even if they did, they'd have to answer for it. People are paying attention now, Ava. You've made sure of that. She felt a small swell of pride at his words. It was true, her posts were gaining traction. Every time she refreshed her notifications, there were more likes, shares, and comments. People were asking questions, demanding answers. But with the support came trolls and anonymous accounts leaving nasty messages. One comment in particular had stuck with her: "You don't know what you're talking about. Stay in your lane before you regret it." She hadn't shown it to her dad. He already had enough on his plate. The following day, Marcus met with Darnell in person for the first time since this all began. They chose a small coffee shop downtown, away from prying eyes. Darnell was the same as Marcus remembered: sharp, confident, and relentless. He had a folder with him, packed with notes, printouts, and photos. "You weren't kidding when you said this was big?" Darnell said as he slid the folder across the table. "I've been digging into the department's records. It's worse than I thought. This isn't just one officer with a history, it's systemic. Complaints go unanswered, cases get closed without proper investigation. And it's always the same excuse: lack of evidence." Marcus flipped through the folder, his jaw tightening with every page. Photos of Jamal, witness statements, internal memos, it was all there. "What do we do with this?" Marcus asked. "We keep pushing," Darnell said. "But we have to be smart about it. If we go public too soon, they'll shut it down before it gets traction. We need to make sure the story's airtight." Marcus nodded, his mind already racing. "And what about the witnesses? Have you talked to any of them?" "Some," Darnell admitted. "Most are too scared to go on record. But there's one, a woman who lives in the building across the street. She saw everything. She's willing to talk, but only if she feels safe." Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He knew how hard it was to convince people to stand up against authority, especially when their own safety was on the line. But he also knew that without witnesses, the truth would never come out. Back at home, Ava was busy scrolling through her messages when she noticed something strange. An account she didn't recognize had sent her a direct message. At first glance, it looked like a supportive note, something about standing up for justice, but as she read on, it took a darker turn. "You think you're helping, but you're just making it worse. Drop this now, or you'll wish you had." Her heart raced as she stared at the screen. She knew she should show her dad, but part of her didn't want to worry him. Instead, she took a screenshot and saved it, just in case. That night, over dinner, Marcus tried to lighten the mood. He talked about his day, cracked a few jokes, and even managed to get Ava to smile. But beneath the surface, they both felt the weight of what they were doing. "Dad," Ava said suddenly, her voice serious. "Why do you think this keeps happening? Like, why do people with power just abuse it?" Marcus put down his fork and thought for a moment. "I think it's because they can," he said finally. "When there aren't any consequences, people start to believe they're untouchable. And the only way to change that is to hold them accountable. To make sure they know someone's watching." Ava nodded, but her mind was still spinning. She wanted to believe her dad was right, that their efforts would make a difference. But the more they uncovered, the bigger the problem seemed. As the week went on, things only got more intense. Darnell managed to secure an interview with the witness he had mentioned, a middle-aged woman named Carla who had seen everything from her apartment window. She described the events in vivid detail, her voice shaking as she recounted the moments leading up to Jamal's death. "I saw him raise his hands," she said. "He was scared. He kept saying he didn't do anything. But they didn't listen. They just fired." Her words sent chills down Marcus's spine. He thanked her for her bravery, promising that her story would be heard. But not everyone was supportive. One evening, as Marcus and Ava were heading out to a community meeting, they found a note taped to their car. It was typed, with no signature, but the message was clear: "Back off, or there will be consequences." Ava looked up at her dad, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do?" Marcus took the note, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his pocket. "We keep going," he said firmly. "No matter what." As they drove to the meeting, Marcus couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, checking for any sign that they were being followed. He didn't want Ava to see how worried he was, but the truth was, he was terrified. This wasn't just about finding justice for Jamal anymore, it was about protecting his family. At the meeting, the room was packed with people from all walks of life. Some were there to support, others to listen, and a few to vent their frustrations. Darnell was there too, sitting quietly in the back, taking notes. When Marcus stood up to speak, the room fell silent. He talked about Jamal, about the witnesses, and about the systemic issues they had uncovered. He didn't sugarcoat anything, and by the time he finished, the room was buzzing with energy. But as they left the meeting that night, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The streets felt too quiet, the shadows too deep. "Let's get home," he said, his voice low. Ava nodded, clutching her phone tightly as they walked to the car. Neither of them noticed the dark sedan parked a few blocks away, its engine idling quietly as they drove off. The drive home was tense, the silence in the car broken only by the faint hum of the engine. Ava kept glancing out the window, her eyes darting between the streetlights and the darkened alleyways they passed. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, his jaw clenched as he fought to keep his mind focused. As they pulled into the driveway, Marcus scanned the street behind them. No cars followed, but the unease in his chest refused to fade. He put the car in park and turned to Ava. "Go inside. I'll be right behind you." "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "I'm fine. Just need to grab something from the trunk." Ava hesitated but eventually nodded, stepping out of the car and heading toward the front door. Marcus waited until she was inside before opening the trunk, pretending to rummage through its contents while keeping an eye on the street. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was out there, watching. Once inside, Marcus locked the door behind him and activated the home security system. Ava was already in the living room, scrolling through her phone with a furrowed brow. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked as he sat down beside her. She handed him her phone, showing him another message from an unknown account. "This isn't a fight you can win. Walk away while you still can." Marcus exhaled sharply, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Did you block the account?" "Yeah, but it doesn't stop them. Every time I block one, another pops up. It's like they're trying to scare us into giving up." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. "Listen to me, Ava. People like this, they hide behind anonymity because they're afraid. Afraid of the truth, afraid of change. They want us to stop because they know we're making a difference. But what if they do more than just send messages?" Ava asked, her voice trembling. "We won't let it get that far," Marcus said firmly. "We're not alone in this. We have allies, people who believe in what we're doing. And we have each other." Ava nodded, though the fear in her eyes remained. She wanted to believe her dad, to trust that their fight for justice was worth the risks. But the threats felt too real, too immediate to ignore. The next day, Marcus received a call from Darnell. His voice was low, urgent. "We've got a problem," he said. "One of the witnesses I spoke to just backed out. Said they're too scared to go on record." "Did they say why?" Marcus asked, already suspecting the answer. "They got a visit," Darnell replied. "Two men claiming to be detectives showed up at their door, asking questions. But their badges didn't look right, and they didn't leave a card." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. "They're trying to silence us." "Yeah, and they're not being subtle about it," Darnell said. "We need to move fast. I'm putting together everything we have so far, but we need more witnesses willing to speak out." "I'll see what I can do," Marcus said before hanging up. He spent the rest of the day making calls, reaching out to community leaders and activists he knew. Some were supportive, offering to help amplify the story, but others were hesitant, afraid of the potential backlash. Meanwhile, Ava was at home, going through the screenshots and messages she had collected. She decided to post another video, addressing the threats head-on. Sitting in her room with her phone propped up on a makeshift stand, she spoke directly to the camera. "I know some people want me to stop," she began, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "But I'm not going to. This isn't just about one person or one incident. It's about all the lives that have been lost, all the families that have been torn apart. We deserve answers, and we deserve justice." She uploaded the video, her heart pounding as she watched the comments and shares roll in. Within hours, it had thousands of views, with people from across the country voicing their support. But mixed in with the positive comments were more threats, more attempts to intimidate her into silence. That evening, as Marcus reviewed Darnell's latest findings, there was a loud knock at the door. Ava froze, her eyes darting to her dad. "Stay here," Marcus said, standing up and walking cautiously to the door. He peered through the peephole but saw no one. Another knock, this time louder. "Who's there?" Marcus called out, his voice firm. No answer. He opened the door a crack, his body tense. On the porch was a small envelope, unmarked. He looked around but saw no sign of who had left it. Bringing it inside, he opened it carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper with a typed message: "You've been warned. This is your last chance to stop." Marcus clenched his fists, anger and fear battling for control. He showed the note to Ava, who stared at it in disbelief. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We keep going," Marcus said, his resolve hardening. "They want us to be scared, to give up. But that's not who we are." As the night stretched on, both father and daughter felt the weight of the fight they had taken on. They knew the risks, knew the odds were stacked against them. But they also knew that backing down wasn't an option. The next morning, Marcus made a decision. He called Darnell and told him to go public with the story, to release everything they had gathered so far. "It's time," Marcus said. "If we wait any longer, they'll bury this," Darnell agreed, though his tone was cautious. "Once this is out there, there's no going back. Are you ready for that?" Marcus glanced at Ava, who was sitting at the kitchen table, determinedly typing away on her laptop. He thought about everything they had been through, the threats, the fear, the uncertainty. "We're ready," he said. The decision to go public felt like the turning point, but Marcus knew it was only the beginning. Darnell worked through the night, compiling the evidence they had into a clear and compelling narrative. The documents, the photos, and the interviews were all there, ready to be shared with the world. By morning, the story was live on several platforms, including local news outlets and social media. The response was immediate. People flooded the comment sections, sharing their own stories of injustice, demanding accountability, and calling out the system. But as the story spread, so did the backlash. Anonymous accounts spewed hateful rhetoric, accusing Marcus and Ava of lying, of stirring up trouble where there wasn't any. Ava tried not to let the negativity get to her, but it was hard. Every hateful comment felt like a jab, a reminder of how divided people were. Still, she stayed focused, using her platform to amplify the voices of others who had been silenced. She posted updates, shared testimonies, and encouraged people to come forward with their stories. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself constantly looking over his shoulder. The threats hadn't stopped, in fact, they had become more frequent and more direct. One evening, as he walked to his car after a meeting with Darnell, he noticed a man standing in the shadows, watching him. Marcus didn't confront him, but he made a mental note of the man's face, just in case. At home, Ava was going through her messages when she came across one that stopped her cold. It was from a woman claiming to have information about Jamal's case, something that could change everything. The message was vague, but the woman offered to meet in person at a public park downtown. Ava debated whether to tell her dad. She knew he wouldn't be happy about her meeting a stranger, especially given everything that was happening. But something about the message felt genuine, like this woman truly wanted to help. The next day, Ava made up an excuse about meeting a friend and headed to the park. She arrived early, her heart pounding as she scanned the area for anyone who looked like they might be waiting for her. After a few minutes, a woman in her late 30s approached her, holding a small bag. "Are you Ava?" the woman asked, her voice low. Ava nodded. "You said you have information about Jamal?" The woman glanced around nervously before handing Ava the bag. "This is all I could get," she said. "I used to work in the department. I saw things they tried to cover up. I can't say more, but this should help." Before Ava could ask any questions, the woman walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Ava opened the bag to find a flash drive and a few crumpled documents. Her hands shook as she zipped the bag shut and hurried home. When she showed the materials to Marcus, he immediately called Darnell. The three of them spent hours poring over the contents of the flash drive, which included internal memos, emails, and surveillance footage that had never been released. "This is a goldmine," Darnell said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It's all here, the officers involved, the cover-up, even direct orders from higher-ups to keep it quiet." "But why would she risk giving this to us?" Ava asked. "Maybe she's had enough," Marcus said. "Maybe she couldn't live with herself knowing the truth was being buried." As they worked to piece everything together, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The threats were becoming bolder, the risks higher. And now, with this new evidence, they were even more of a target. That night, as Marcus and Ava were sitting in the living room, the lights flickered. At first, they thought it was just a power surge, but then they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside. Marcus motioned for Ava to stay put as he grabbed his phone and moved toward the window. Peering through the curtains, he saw two figures near the edge of the property, their faces obscured by the darkness. "Stay here," he whispered to Ava, who nodded, clutching her phone tightly. Marcus stepped outside, his heart pounding as he called out into the night. "Who's there?" The figures didn't respond, but he could hear them retreating, their footsteps crunching against the gravel. He stayed outside for a few more minutes, scanning the yard for any sign of them, before heading back inside. "We need to be careful," Marcus said as he locked the door behind him. "They're not just watching anymore. They're testing us." Ava's face was pale, but her resolve was unshaken. "Then we fight back," she said. "We keep pushing until they have no choice but to face the truth." In the days that followed, the tension only grew. Darnell managed to connect with another witness, a young man who had been too scared to come forward before. His testimony corroborated Carla's account, adding even more weight to their case. But with every step forward, the resistance they faced became more intense. Anonymous emails flooded Darnell's inbox, warning him to drop the story. Marcus's phone rang at odd hours, the caller always hanging up without saying a word. And Ava's social media accounts were bombarded with threats and hateful messages. Despite it all, they refused to back down. The evidence was too compelling, the stakes too high. They knew they were up against a powerful system, but they also knew that the truth was on their side. One evening, as they sat together in a living room, Marcus turned to Ava. "You know this isn't going to get any easier, right?" Ava nodded. "I know. But we've come too far to stop now." Marcus smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "That's my girl." As they prepared for the next phase of their fight, they couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen, something that would either make or break their case. The tension was palpable, the air heavy with anticipation. And somewhere in the shadows, the forces working against them were preparing their next move. The days that followed felt like a powder keg, ready to explode. Ava and Marcus moved with caution, their every action laced with paranoia. Marcus reinforced the house's security, installing additional cameras and motion sensors around the perimeter. Ava, though wary, remained defiant, continuing to post updates and rally support online. Her audience had grown exponentially, with more people sharing her posts and calling for accountability. But the threats escalated alongside the attention. One morning, Ava woke up to find a chilling message spray-painted across their garage door: "This ends now." Marcus called the police, but the officers who arrived seemed uninterested. Treating it as little more than a teenage prank. "Doesn't feel like kids to me," Marcus said, his voice tight as he watched them half-heartedly jot down notes. "Sir, we'll file a report, but unless you've got evidence of who did this, there's not much we can do," one of the officers replied, his tone dismissive. As the patrol car pulled away, Ava turned to her dad. "They don't care, do they?" "No," Marcus said, his frustration evident. "But that doesn't mean we stop." Later that afternoon, Darnell called with an update. "I've got a lead on someone who used to work in the precinct," he said. "They weren't directly involved in Jamal's case, but they might have seen or heard something." "Are they willing to talk?" Marcus asked. "They're hesitant," Darnell admitted. "Said they'd consider it if we met them in person." "Somewhere private," Marcus sighed. He hated the idea of walking into another potential trap, but every lead mattered. "Set it up," he said. The meeting was arranged for the next evening, at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Ava wanted to come, but Marcus insisted she stay home, arguing it was too dangerous. Reluctantly, she agreed, though her anxiety was palpable as she watched him leave. The warehouse was cold and dimly lit, its walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti. Marcus arrived early, scanning the area for any signs of trouble. When the contact finally appeared, they were wearing a hoodie, the drawstrings pulled tight around their face. "You Marcus?" the person asked, their voice low and shaky. "I am," Marcus replied. "You said you had information about Jamal's case?" The contact hesitated, glancing around nervously before speaking. "I don't know everything, but I know enough. There were orders, quiet ones, passed down through the ranks. They wanted the case buried, the story silenced." "Why?" Marcus asked, his tone sharp. "Because it wasn't just about Jamal," the contact said. "There's a pattern, similar cases, all swept under the rug. The same officers, the same tactics. They didn't want anyone connecting the dots." Marcus's heart raced as he listened. "Do you have proof?" The contact nodded, pulling a small notebook from their pocket. "I kept records. Names, dates, conversations I overheard. It's all in here." Before Marcus could take the notebook, the sound of tires screeching echoed through the warehouse. A black SUV pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. "Go." The contact hissed, shoving the notebook into Marcus's hands. "Get out of here." Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He bolted toward the nearest exit, the sound of footsteps and shouting behind him. He didn't look back until he was safely in his car, the notebook clutched tightly in his hands. At home, Ava was pacing when Marcus burst through the door, out of breath and visibly shaken. "What happened?" she asked, rushing to his side. "They know we're getting close," Marcus said, holding up the notebook. "But this might be what we need to blow the case wide open." Ava took the notebook, her hands trembling as she flipped through its pages. The information inside was damning: dates of incidents, names of officers, even snippets of conversations that hinted at corruption at the highest levels. "We have to go public with this," Ava said. "Right now." "Not yet," Marcus replied. "We need to verify everything, make sure it's airtight. If we go public too soon, they'll discredit us before we even get started." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Darnell worked tirelessly to corroborate the information in the notebook, reaching out to other sources and cross-referencing details. Ava continued to mobilize support online, her posts gaining traction as more people demanded answers. But the tension at home was palpable. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar car passing by, felt like a potential threat. Ava struggled to sleep, her mind racing with what-ifs. Marcus stayed vigilant, keeping his phone close and his eyes on the security monitors. One night, as Ava was lying in bed, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an anonymous sender, with a subject line, "Final warning." The message was brief but chilling: "Stop now, or you'll regret it." Attached was a photo of their house, taken from the street. Ava's blood ran cold. She rushed to her dad's room, the phone shaking in her hand as she showed him the email. Marcus's face darkened as he read it. "They're trying to scare us," he said, though his voice betrayed a hint of fear. "They're not just trying, Dad. They're succeeding," Ava replied, her voice breaking. Marcus pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. "We'll get through this," he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. The notebook sat on the kitchen table, a silent reminder of the danger they were in, and the truth they were fighting to reveal. The days blurred together as Marcus, Ava, and Darnell worked tirelessly. The notebook's contents were explosive, but verifying every detail was slow, painstaking work. The weight of their mission was beginning to take its toll. Ava barely slept, her mind constantly cycling through the danger they faced and the hope they clung to. Marcus stayed sharp, refusing to let exhaustion dull his instincts. Darnell, though usually calm, was growing increasingly paranoid, double-checking locks and glancing over his shoulder at every turn. The pressure mounted as news of their investigation leaked. It wasn't clear how, but someone had tipped off the wrong people. Suddenly, reporters were showing up at their door, their cameras flashing and questions firing. Marcus had no choice but to turn them away, knowing that speaking prematurely could put them at even greater risk. Ava's phone buzzed incessantly, with messages ranging from heartfelt support to venomous threats. One night, as she scrolled through her inbox, she received a video from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it. The footage showed a man, face hidden, standing outside a building that looked eerily familiar. The camera panned to a window, revealing her dad sitting at the kitchen table. The video ended with a message: "You're not safe." Panicked, Ava ran to Marcus, clutching her phone. "They're watching us, Dad. They know everything." Marcus's face hardened as he watched the video. "We need to go to the police," he said, though they both knew it was a gamble. Trusting the system they were fighting against felt impossible, but the threat was becoming too great to ignore. Darnell weighed in over the phone. "If you go to the police, make sure it's someone outside the local precinct. We can't risk them tipping off the people we're investigating." Reluctantly, Marcus agreed. Early the next morning, he and Ava drove 2 towns over to meet with an investigator who had a reputation for integrity. Marcus laid everything out: the threats, the evidence, the video, and handed over a copy of the notebook. The investigator, a woman named Agent Parker, listened intently. Her expression was unreadable, but her questions were sharp, precise. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You're right to be cautious. This runs deep. But if you're willing to trust me, I'll do everything I can to help." As they left the office, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. But Ava couldn't shake the feeling that they had just painted an even bigger target on their backs. That night, she stayed up late, scrolling through social media and news updates, trying to gauge the public's reaction to their story. The support was there, but so were the trolls, their words a constant reminder of the resistance they faced. Around midnight, the power went out. Ava froze, her laptop screen plunging her room into darkness. She grabbed her phone, using its flashlight to navigate to the hallway. "Dad?" she called out, her voice trembling. "I'm checking the breaker," Marcus replied from the other side of the house. "Stay inside and lock the doors." Ava's heart raced as she waited, every creak and groan of the house amplified in the silence. Suddenly, she heard a faint tapping at her bedroom window. She turned slowly, her flashlight beam shaking as it illuminated the glass. Outside, she saw nothing but the reflection of her own terrified face. Marcus returned moments later, his expression grim. "The breaker's fine. Someone cut the power." Before Ava could respond, they heard a loud crash from the backyard. Marcus grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door and motioned for Ava to stay back. Together, they crept toward the noise, their breaths shallow and silent. The backyard was empty, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Marcus scanned the area, his grip on the bat tightening. "Whoever it was, they're gone," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. As they returned to the house, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, and the message was chillingly simple: "Next time, we come inside." The message rattled them, but it also solidified their resolve. They couldn't let fear win. Over the next few days, they doubled down on their efforts, working with Agent Parker to ensure the evidence was ready for a public release. Darnell arranged for a press conference, a bold move that would put them directly in the spotlight. The night before the conference, Ava couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, her mind racing with what-ifs. What if the evidence wasn't enough? What if the threats turned into action? What if they had already lost? Marcus knocked on her door and stepped inside. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. Ava shook her head. "I'm scared, Dad. What if we're making it worse?" Marcus took her hand, his grip firm and steady. "It's already worse, Ava. But we're doing the right thing. Sometimes doing what's right means taking the hard road, even when it feels impossible." As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, they prepared for what could be the most important day of their lives. The tension was unbearable, every moment stretching into eternity as they waited for the press conference to begin. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras aimed and ready. Marcus, Ava, and Darnell sat at the front, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The air buzzed with anticipation, but underneath it all was an undercurrent of danger, a sense that the people they were up against wouldn't go down without a fight. As Marcus stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent. He glanced at Ava, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. He took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium. "We're here today to tell the truth," he began, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "The truth about my nephew, Jamal, and the system that failed him." The room erupted with flashes and murmurs as Marcus continued, laying out the evidence they had uncovered. Ava watched him, her heart pounding as she scanned the crowd for any signs of trouble. She didn't know what was coming, but she could feel it, a moment of reckoning, just on the horizon. As Marcus spoke, his voice carried a quiet determination that filled the room. The reporters hung on his every word, their pens scribbling furiously as cameras captured his every gesture. He laid out the details methodically, careful not to miss a single point. From the corrupted investigations to the anonymous threats, he painted a damning picture of a system riddled with rot. Ava scanned the crowd, her pulse racing as her eyes darted from face to face. Most people looked riveted, but a few stood out, stern, unsmiling figures at the back of the room, their eyes locked on her father. They weren't reporters. She was sure of it. She nudged Darnell and whispered, "Who are those guys in the back?" Darnell followed her gaze, his expression darkening. "They're not here for the story," he muttered. "Stay close." Marcus finished speaking and stepped back, his hands gripping the podium as the room erupted with questions. Ava felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. They had done it, they had brought the truth into the light. But the uneasy tension in the air told her the fight was far from over. One of the men in the back stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "Mr. Holloway, do you have any proof that directly implicates law enforcement? Or are these just baseless accusations?" Marcus stood his ground, meeting the man's gaze. "We have evidence," he said firmly. "And it's been handed over to the proper authorities. If you're asking me whether the truth is inconvenient for some people, the answer is yes. But that doesn't make it any less true." The man smirked, his posture casual yet menacing. "Interesting," he said, before retreating back into the crowd. Ava felt a chill run down her spine. Whoever he wasn't just another skeptic. After the conference ended, they made their way to the car, the relief of finally speaking out tempered by a gnawing sense of unease. The streets outside were crowded with onlookers and reporters, their questions blending into a cacophony of noise. Marcus kept a protective hand on Ava's shoulder, his eyes scanning for anything unusual. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Darnell leaned forward from the back seat. "We need to be careful," he said. "That guy wasn't a reporter. He's connected, I'd bet money on it." Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "I saw it too. We'll stick to the plan. Keep our heads down until Parker finishes her investigation." But as they drove through the city, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. She glanced at the side mirror and noticed a black sedan a few cars behind them. It wasn't doing anything overt, but it stayed with them through every turn. Her chest tightened. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think someone's following us." Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror, his expression hardening. "Darnell, keep an eye on it." The car followed them for several blocks, always keeping its distance. Marcus took a sudden right turn down a narrow street, then another, and another, trying to lose it. The black sedan stayed with them. "They're not even trying to hide it," Darnell said grimly. "Hold on," Marcus said, accelerating as he turned onto a busier road. Ava gripped the armrest, her heart pounding. The sedan tried to keep up, but Marcus weaved through traffic with practiced precision, finally losing it at a crowded intersection. They didn't go home. Instead, Marcus drove to a public place, a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and the smell of stale coffee filled the air. Marcus ordered 3 cups and sat at a corner booth, his back to the wall. "We need to stay low for a while," he said. "Whoever they are, they're not going to stop. Not after today." Ava nodded, her hands still shaking. "Do you think Parker can protect us?" Darnell hesitated before answering. "She's good, but even she has limits. We just have to hope the evidence speaks louder than their threats." As the night dragged on, they strategized their next moves, trying to anticipate every possible scenario. But even as they planned, the weight of the unknown loomed over them. Ava couldn't shake the image of the man in the crowd or the relentless black sedan. She knew they had exposed something powerful, something dangerous. And whatever was coming next would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The diner felt like a safe haven at first, with its constant hum of chatter and the clinking of coffee cups, but the reprieve was short-lived. Marcus kept glancing at the windows, his sharp eyes scanning the parking lot for any sign of the black sedan. Darnell sat across from him, reviewing the files on his laptop, while Ava picked at a piece of pie she didn't have the appetite to eat. Despite the weariness etched into their faces, none of them were ready to let their guard down. As the clock ticked past midnight, the tension in the room became palpable. Ava noticed a man enter the diner, a stranger wearing a weather jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He moved with deliberate casualness, but something about him felt off. He walked past their table without making eye contact and sat at the counter, his back to them. "Dad," Ava whispered, nudging Marcus. "That guy, he's been outside. I saw him in the parking lot when we pulled in." Marcus turned slightly, his gaze flicking to the man. "Stay calm," he murmured, though his own unease was clear. "Don't make it obvious we've noticed." Darnell glanced over, his fingers hovering above his laptop keyboard. "He's not here for pancakes," he muttered. "That's for sure." The man ordered a coffee, his voice low but carrying just enough for them to hear. His phone sat on the counter, and every so often, he glanced at the screen, as if waiting for a signal. Ava's heart pounded in her chest. Was this just paranoia, or was the stranger connected to the threats they'd been receiving? Before they could decide what to do, the waitress approached their table with a nervous smile. Excuse me," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "That man at the counter. He left this for you." She handed Marcus a folded napkin. Marcus opened it cautiously. Inside was a message, scrawled in hurried handwriting: "You're not safe here. Leave now. Trust no one." Ava's stomach dropped. "What does that even mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It means we've been made," Marcus said, standing abruptly. "We're leaving. Now." As they gathered their things and headed for the exit, Ava couldn't resist one last glance at the counter. The man was gone, his stool empty, the coffee cup untouched. Outside, the parking lot was eerily still, but every shadow felt like a threat. They piled into the car, Marcus keeping his eyes on the rearview mirror as they drove away. "Where are we going?" Ava asked, her voice tight with fear. "Someplace they won't expect," Marcus replied. "We need to regroup and figure out our next move." But before they could even reach the highway, Marcus's phone buzzed with a call from Agent Parker. He answered quickly, His tone clipped. "Parker, what's going on?" Her voice was tense. "We've got a problem. Someone leaked the notebook. It's all over the internet." The car went silent as the weight of her words sank in. "What do you mean, leaked?" Darnell asked, leaning forward. "Every page," Parker said. "It's been scanned and uploaded. Whoever did this wants to force our hand. The media's already picked it up, and it's chaos." Marcus's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Does this compromise the investigation?" "It complicates things," Parker admitted. "The public's demanding answers, which is good. But it also means the people you're up against are going to get desperate. They know their time's running out." Ava's mind raced. What if it's a trap? What if they leaked it to flush us out? Parker hesitated before responding. "It's possible. Be careful, Marcus. Whoever you're dealing with, they're not playing by the rules." As they ended the call, the gravity of the situation settled over them like a storm cloud. The notebook, their most powerful weapon, was now a double-edged sword. It had the potential to expose the truth to millions, but it also painted a target on their backs. Darnell broke the silence. "If the notebook's out there, it changes everything. We don't just have to worry about the people behind this, we've got the whole world watching now." Marcus nodded grimly. "Which means we have to be smarter, faster, and one step ahead." The car's GPS dinged as they approached a turnoff leading to an old motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't part of the plan, but Marcus had decided to stop somewhere unpredictable, a place no one would think to look. They checked in under fake names, paying in cash, and settled into a room that smelled faintly of mildew. As Darnell set up his laptop to monitor the online fallout, Ava sat on the bed, scrolling through social media. The leaked notebook was everywhere: hashtags, videos, debates. Most people were supportive, but a vocal minority dismissed it as a hoax or spread misinformation to discredit them. "Look at this," Ava said, holding up her phone. "People are already twisting the narrative," Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "We knew this would happen. We just have to stay focused." But as the night wore on, it became clear that the leak had done more than stir public interest. Messages flooded Ava's phone, some supportive, others filled with threats. One, in particular, made her blood run cold. It was a photo of the diner they'd just left, taken from across the street. The caption read, "You can run, but you can't hide." Marcus and Darnell stared at the photo in silence, their expressions grim. "They're closer than we thought," Marcus said finally. "We need to move again. Now." But before they could pack their things, a knock came at the door. It was sharp, insistent, and sent a jolt of fear through all three of them. Marcus motioned for Ava to stay back as he approached the door, his hand hovering over the lock. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. A pause. Then a voice they didn't recognize, "You're out of time." Marcus froze, his hand gripping the doorknob. The voice on the other side was calm, almost casual, but it carried an edge that sent a chill through the room. Ava backed away, her pulse pounding in her ears, while Darnell quietly slid his laptop off the table and tucked it into his bag. Every instinct told them to run, but there was nowhere to go. "What do you want?" Marcus called out, his voice firm but low. The person didn't answer right away. Instead, there was a faint scratching sound, like something being slid under the door. Then the footsteps receded, slow and deliberate, until the hallway fell silent. Marcus hesitated, his muscles tense, before unlocking the door and peering outside. The hallway was empty. He glanced down and saw a small envelope lying on the floor. Picking it up, he shut the door quickly and locked it again. "What is it?" Ava asked, her voice trembling. Marcus opened the envelope, revealing a single photograph. It was blurry, taken at a distance, but the subject was unmistakable. It was Ava, standing by the car earlier that evening. Scrawled across the bottom in red ink were the words, "She's the key." Ava's breath caught in her throat. "What does that mean? Why me?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened as he studied the photo, his mind racing. "They're trying to rattle us," he said finally. "But we can't let them. It's a scare tactic." Darnell shook his head. "This is more than that. They've been watching us closer than we realized. If they know this much, they could already be a step ahead." Ava sank onto the bed, her hands trembling as she gripped the edges of the photo. "I didn't ask for any of this," she whispered. "I just wanted to do the right thing." "You are doing the right thing," Marcus said, kneeling in front of her. His eyes were filled with a mix of determination and fear. "That's why they're targeting you. Because they know you're strong enough to see this through." But the words offered little comfort. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as the reality of their situation settled in. They were being hunted, their every move anticipated. And now, Ava was at the center of it all. Darnell's laptop pinged, breaking the tense silence. He opened it quickly, his eyes scanning the screen. "You're not gonna like this," he said, turning it toward Marcus and Ava. A live stream had just gone viral, showing footage of Marcus at the diner, the photo of Ava, and grainy surveillance clips of their car leaving the parking lot. The caption read, "The Holloway family can't run forever." Ava's chest tightened as she stared at the screen. "They're broadcasting this? To everyone?" "Not just everyone," Darnell said grimly. "This is targeted. They're sending a message to us and anyone trying to help. They want us isolated." Marcus clenched his fists, his frustration boiling over. "Enough," he said, his voice sharp. "We're not going to sit here waiting for them to make their next move. We're taking control of this." "How?" Darnell asked. "They've got eyes everywhere. We can't trust anyone." "We don't need to trust anyone," Marcus replied. "We've got the evidence, and we've got Parker. We use that. We get loud. Louder than they ever expected." Ava frowned. "But if they're willing to go this far, what's stopping them from?" "I don't know, doing something worse?" Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Because they thrive in the shadows. If we shine enough light on them, they lose their power. That's why they're trying to scare us. They know they're running out of options." Darnell nodded slowly. "He's right. The more people see the truth, the harder it'll be for them to silence us." But even as they planned their next steps, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the message they'd been sent. The words on the photo, "She's the key," echoed in her mind, filling her with unease. What did they know about her? And why did they think she was the answer to unraveling it all? Outside, a faint rumble of thunder broke the stillness of the night. The motel room felt colder, the thin walls offering little comfort against the storm brewing both inside and out. Ava stared out the window, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger. She had always thought courage was something you chose, but now she realized it was something you were forced into, whether you were ready or not. Behind her, Marcus and Darnell continued strategizing, their voices low but urgent. Ava turned back to them, her fear giving way to a quiet resolve. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice steady, "we don't back down. Not now." Marcus looked at her, pride flickering in his eyes. "We won't," he promised. "Not ever." But as they solidified their plan, none of them noticed the small red light blinking on the ceiling, a hidden camera, silently transmitting their every word to an unknown watcher. The storm outside was only just beginning. The storm raged outside as the small motel room became the center of their desperate plan. Marcus worked quickly, mapping out their next steps on a napkin, while Darnell hacked into local security feeds, trying to trace the live stream's origin. Ava watched them, her heart pounding, but her mind was racing in a different direction. The words on the photograph, "She's the key," felt like a puzzle she was just beginning to understand. "Got it," Darnell suddenly announced, his voice cutting through the tension. "The live stream is bouncing through a bunch of servers, but the source signal, it's local. Whoever's doing this is close. Real close." Marcus nodded. "That's good. If they're nearby, we can find them and shut this down before they do more damage." But Ava shook her head, her thoughts swirling. "Wait. What if that's what they want? They leaked the notebook, sent us the message, and now they're leading us to them. It's a setup." Darnell frowned. "She's got a point. Every move they've made has been calculated. If we go after them now, we might be walking straight into a trap." Marcus hesitated, torn between action and caution. "If we don't stop them, they'll keep coming. We can't just sit here waiting." Ava's voice was quiet but firm. "Then we have to think smarter. They think I'm the key, right? Let's use that. Let's give them what they want, but on our terms." The room went silent as the weight of her suggestion sank in. Marcus studied her face, searching for any sign of hesitation. "You're sure about this?" he asked. Ava nodded. "If they've been watching us this closely, they already know where we are. We can't run forever. But if we draw them out, maybe we can turn this around." The plan was risky, but it was their only option. Darnell sent a message to the same online forum where the notebook had been leaked, claiming to have new evidence and daring their pursuers to meet them at a location of their choosing. The bait was set, and now all they could do was wait. The chosen meeting spot was an abandoned factory on the edge of town, its crumbling walls and shattered windows providing the perfect stage for their final confrontation. Marcus parked the car a block away, ensuring they'd have a quick escape route if things went south. As they approached the factory, Every sound felt amplified, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the distant rumble of thunder, the faint hum of a drone circling overhead. Inside, the factory was a maze of rusted machinery and forgotten debris. Shadows danced on the walls as their flashlights cut through the darkness. Ava's hands trembled slightly, but she held her head high, refusing to show fear. They reached the center of the building, where a single table had been set up, a laptop resting on top of it. The screen glowed faintly, displaying a countdown timer. 5 minutes, Darnell said, glancing at the timer. They're making us wait. Marcus scanned the room, his instincts on high alert. Stay sharp. They're here somewhere. The minutes crawled by, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, the laptop screen flickered, and a distorted voice filled the air. You came, it said, low and mechanical. How predictable. Ava stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. We're here. Now tell us what you want. The voice chuckled, cold and calculated. What we've always wanted, the truth. But you already knew that, didn't you? You've been holding onto it this whole time. Marcus clenched his fists. If you wanted the truth, you wouldn't be hiding behind threats and manipulation. Ah, but the truth is dangerous, the voice replied. It changes everything. And Ava, dear, sweet Ava, you're the one who can deliver it. A sudden noise made them all turn. A figure emerged from the shadows, wearing a hooded jacket and holding a small device in their hand. The stranger stepped closer, and Ava's breath caught in her throat as she recognized them. It was Agent Parker. Parker? Marcus said, his voice filled with disbelief. You're behind this? She lowered the hood, her face calm but resolute. It's bigger than you realize, Marcus. Bigger than any of us. The people we're up against. They control everything. The system is rigged, and the only way to break it is to burn it down. Ava shook her head, her voice trembling. But why? Why do you need me? Parker's gaze softened, almost apologetic. Because you're the only one they'll listen to. Your voice has power, Ava. You can turn the tide. But it has to come at a cost. You have to expose everything, even if it means losing everything. Before Ava could respond, the countdown on the laptop reached 0. A loud beep echoed through the factory, followed by the sound of approaching sirens. Parker's expression darkened. They're here. You need to go. Now. Marcus grabbed Ava's arm, pulling her toward the exit. We're not leaving without you, he said to Parker. But she shook her head. This is my fight. Go, before it's too late. As the sirens grew louder, Marcus, Ava, and Darnell ran, their hearts pounding. Outside, they spotted a fleet of black SUVs pulling up, armed agents spilling out and storming the building. From a safe distance, they watched as Parker disappeared into the chaos, her fate uncertain. Back in the car, the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on them. The notebook was out, the truth was spreading, and their enemies were exposed. But at what cost? Ava stared out the window, her mind racing. Parker's words echoed in her ears, your voice has power. Use it. And she knew, despite everything, that their fight was far from over. The night air felt thick, the tension still hanging over them as they drove away from the abandoned factory. The distant sound of sirens was like a constant hum in the background, a reminder that things were far from over. Ava's mind churned with the events that had just unfolded. Parker's last words repeated in her head, your voice has power. Use it. What did it mean? What was she supposed to do with that power now that everything had been set into motion? Marcus glanced at her from the driver's seat, his expression unreadable. You okay? Ava didn't answer right away. She couldn't bring herself to say that she was okay, not when everything had shifted in such an irreversible way. No, not really, she said quietly. I'm just trying to process all of this. I get it, Marcus said, his voice soft. But we can't stop now. We've got the evidence. We've exposed them. It's up to us to make sure the world sees it. Darnell, who had been quiet until now, spoke up from the back seat. We need to keep our heads low for a while. This isn't over. There's too much at stake, and now we've made ourselves a target. The people behind this, they're not going to just walk away. Ava looked out the window at the dark streets passing by, her hands clutching the seatbelt in her lap. Her thoughts were tangled, and her heart raced as she tried to process the weight of what they had just done. They had exposed a system so deep, so far-reaching, that even Parker, someone they thought they could trust, had turned out to be part of it. Do you think Parker was telling the truth? Ava finally asked, her voice small. Is there really no going back now? Are we part of something that's already too far gone? Marcus sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. I don't know. But I do know this, We can't let fear stop us. If we back down now, then we're letting them win. Everything we've done. It'll all have been for nothing." Ava nodded slowly. He was right. But the uncertainty lingered, gnawing at her insides. How much of what they were facing was part of a larger plan they couldn't even begin to comprehend? The stakes were so much higher than they had ever imagined. As they reached their temporary safe house, the weight of the night's events seemed to press down even harder. The place was small, just a cramped apartment in an out-of-the-way part of town, but it was safe, at least for now. Marcus and Darnell moved quickly, setting up surveillance and checking the perimeter. But Ava couldn't bring herself to focus on any of that. Instead, she sat down on the couch, staring blankly at the wall, lost in her thoughts. Minutes stretched into hours as they huddled around their laptops, making sure every last bit of evidence was secured. Ava watched them, feeling a deep sense of unease settling in her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. A new threat. A new twist. And she was right. Just as the sun began to rise, casting pale light through the blinds, Darnell let out a soft curse. "Guys, you need to see this." Ava stood up, her heart skipping a beat. She joined Marcus at the desk, where Darnell had pulled up a news report. On the screen was a familiar face, Parker. But it wasn't the same Parker they'd known. This time, her expression was cold, distant, and her words sent a shiver down Ava's spine. "I know who's behind everything," Parker was saying in the live interview. "I know what's at stake. And I'm here to tell you that there's only one way this ends. The truth doesn't matter anymore. It's too dangerous. You've seen the damage it can cause." Ava's blood ran cold. "What is she talking about?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus gritted his teeth. "She's covering her tracks. This isn't just about power anymore. She's protecting someone. Or something." The reporter pressed her, asking about the conspiracy and why Parker was stepping forward now. "I've seen too much," Parker said, her tone shifting. "I've crossed the line, and now it's too late. But you're all in danger. They'll come for you, and they won't stop until you're gone." The broadcast ended abruptly, and the screen went black. Ava's mind was reeling. "They'll come for you." The words echoed like a haunting prophecy, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of the danger they were in. It wasn't just the people they had exposed, it was the entire system, the network that controlled everything, from the shadows to the surface. "Parker's not on our side anymore," Darnell muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he searched for more information. "She's a wild card now. We don't know whose side she's really on." Ava turned away from the screen, pacing in a tight circle. "This doesn't make sense. We were so close. Why back out now? Why send us into the storm?" Marcus stood up, his face grim. "Maybe she didn't back out. Maybe she's trying to save us from something bigger than we realize. But we can't trust anything she says anymore." The tension was unbearable. Ava felt the weight of the choices they'd made pressing down on her chest. There was no way out of this now. Not for any of them. The finality of the situation hit her like a wave. Then, just as the room seemed to hold its breath, the sound of a knock at the door broke the silence. They froze, exchanging wary looks. Ava stepped forward cautiously, her heart hammering in her chest. Whoever it was, they had come for them. The knock at the door echoed in the small apartment, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Ava's heart raced as she exchanged a look with Marcus and Darnell. The tension in the room was suffocating. Whoever was on the other side of that door could be the enemy, or maybe, just maybe, it was someone who had answers. The possibility that it could be an ally was almost too far-fetched to consider. "Who the hell is it?" Marcus muttered, keeping his voice low but tense. Ava stood frozen, her hand hovering over the door handle, torn between fear and necessity. They had no choice. They couldn't keep running. They had come too far to let fear control them now. "Should we answer it?" Darnell asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "What if it's a trap?" Ava hesitated, weighing the odds. The danger was real, but so was the truth. She couldn't ignore the feeling in her gut, telling her that the answers they were looking for were just beyond that door. Before anyone could speak again, Ava turned the handle, pushing the door open with a soft creak. Standing there, in the dim light of the hallway, was a woman. She was tall, wearing a dark coat, and her expression was serious but calm. Ava didn't recognize her at first, but the woman's eyes, their cold, calculating intensity, felt familiar. It was like looking into the eyes of someone who had seen everything and knew exactly what it took to survive. "Who are you?" Ava asked, her voice steady, but her body tense, ready for whatever came next. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, She took a step forward and scanned the room quickly, almost as if she were assessing the situation. She had the air of someone who wasn't afraid of whatever came next. "I'm not here to hurt you," the woman said, her voice low but certain. "I'm here to help." Ava didn't know what to make of it. They had been so deep in this mess for so long, how could they trust anyone at this point? But something about the woman's presence was different. There was an unspoken understanding, a recognition between them that suggested the woman knew exactly what they had been through. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, his voice skeptical but with a hint of curiosity. "And why should we trust you?" The woman's lips curled into a slight smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Because I'm the one who can bring this all to an end. And I'm the one who can stop them from coming after you." Ava felt a jolt of surprise. "You can stop them?" The woman nodded. "I can. But not if you keep running. You've made enough noise. The truth is out now. All we can do is finish what you started." Marcus looked at Darnell, who seemed as conflicted as Ava felt. But in the end, they both knew that there was no other way. If this woman could really help, they had no choice but to trust her. "All right," Marcus said, stepping aside. "Come in." "But if this is a setup, it's not," the woman interrupted, stepping into the apartment and closing the door behind her. She pulled a small envelope from inside her coat and handed it to Ava. "This will give you everything you need to expose them for good." Ava took the envelope with trembling hands, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she looked at the woman, who was now seated at the table, her posture relaxed but alert. The tension in the room still hung thick, but it was different now. There was a sense of finality in the air. "Who are you really?" Darnell asked, eyeing the woman with suspicion. "And why are you helping us?" The woman met his gaze steadily, her voice calm but firm. "I was once part of the system you're fighting against. But I left it. Now, I'm one of the few who can bring them down." Ava felt a cold chill creep up her spine. "You were with them?" The woman's face darkened for a moment, but then she nodded. "I was. But I saw too much. And now I'm on your side. You've done the hard part. Now let me finish it." The room fell silent as Ava sat down, slowly opening the envelope. Inside, there was a flash drive, and a piece of paper with a single address. No explanation, no details, just a place. "What's this?" Ava asked, her voice low. "What do we do with this?" The woman didn't hesitate. "Take it to that address. The person there will give you the final piece of the puzzle. Everything you need to bring them down." Ava glanced at Marcus, who nodded. It was the only lead they had left, and they couldn't afford to waste it. "Thank you," Ava said quietly, looking back at the woman. The woman gave her a slight smile. "You've already done the hard work. I'm just here to help you finish it." The woman stood up, preparing to leave. Ava felt a moment of hesitation, like there was something she still needed to ask, some last piece of information that could change everything. But before she could speak, the woman was already at the door, her figure disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. They didn't hear from her again. The drive to the address was long, but it felt like a dream. Ava's mind was consumed with thoughts of everything that had happened, the lies, the deception, the danger, and how it had all led them to this moment. They were close now. So close. When they arrived, they found a small, unmarked building. It looked deserted, like no one had been there for years. But as they stepped inside, the feeling of unease was overwhelming. Every step they took echoed in the silence, a reminder that they were walking into the unknown. At the center of the room stood a man, old and weathered but with eyes that gleamed with knowledge. He didn't say anything at first, just watched them, his gaze piercing through the silence. Ava stepped forward, holding out the flash drive. "We were told you'd have the answers." The man took the flash drive without a word, slipping it into a computer. The screen flickered to life, revealing a series of documents, pictures, and files that explained everything, every dark corner of the conspiracy they had uncovered. Names, dates, places. The web of corruption was far bigger than any of them had imagined. As the man scrolled through the documents, he looked at Ava, his eyes filled with a quiet approval. "You did it," he said simply. "You exposed them." But Ava wasn't sure what to feel. The fight wasn't over. There was still so much to do. But now, at least, they had the truth. The kind of truth that could change everything. And as they left that building, the weight of everything that had happened finally began to sink in. They had survived. They had fought. And in the end, they had won. But the world was never the same as it had been before.